So this is a major concern for journalism, isn't it, in Guinea-Bissau?
Yes, it is quite a major concern because when you see these two outlets being dispelled just months before the general elections, you have to ask yourself what's behind this, and what can journalists who will remain operating in the country, local journalists who don't always have the same access to the international sphere as foreign journalists do sometimes. What will those local journalists expect as we go into elections? So it is certainly very worrying.
What have the authorities offered as a reason for the suspension?
So this is part of the problem with the closure, the order to close RTP and Lusa, is that there's no public explanation that has been provided, or no detailed one at least. We've seen both the president and the prime minister repeatedly declining to answer questions about this, promising some statement which is yet to come. And we've had the Prime Minister, Kamara, simply saying that this is a matter of sovereignty. The President himself saying this is a matter of between Guinea-Bissau and
Mm.
Portugal. Now, when you're closing media outlets that are so important to the ecosystem of news reporting, and when you're saying you're giving journalists, Portuguese journalists who work with them days to leave the country, certainly more is expected than simply saying this is sovereignty. This is something between us, between this country and that country. There has been no
Mm.
explanation.
I think you've partly answered my next question, but what does this tell us about the general state of affairs in terms of media freedom in Guinea-Bissau? And have you noticed a trend of decline over time?
The context of this is that Guinea-Bissau has been in a state of political tension, um, high political tension, for almost 2 years now. Of course, if we cast our eyes, more historically, there's always been this history of patterns of political turmoil since for decades. But in 2023, at the end of 2023, we saw President Mbalo dissolving parliament in Guinea-Bissau. And what has followed since then is really heightened political tension, elections repeatedly postponed. Mbalo was elected for a 5-year term in 2019, but because elections have been postponed repeatedly, he's remained in office. We're expecting elections now in November. Now, with this background of political tension, political turmoil, we've seen journalists being caught in the crossfire, so to say. Last year, we documented in two big reports that Mbalo's own fractious relationship with the press, often coming into verbally denigrating journalists who ask him questions instead of answering them, while at the same time we were documenting journalists being obstructed, being denied access to press conferences, and even in some instances being attacked by police and government officials. And if you go again even back further, late 2023, we saw that following the dissolution of parliament, there were armed raids on state broadcasters, which is something you never want to see journalists having to suffer, and which is really an intimidatory tactic. So this is the broader context, the
Mm.
broader political and media freedom context in which these shutdowns of LUSA and RTP are happening.
So, I mean, I guess the biggest theme in all of this is that there is a political story that's playing out, and a president who wants to cement his grip on power.
It seems there's a political story that's playing out and that's going to play out. And perhaps, the again, I need to re-emphasize the authorities haven't explained themselves. And it's always risky when you try to speculate what's going on in people's minds. But the actions that we're seeing point to a wish for the political story to play out without the presence of critical or
Mm.
um, independent observation of the media. That's what we can read from their actions.
So, as the CPJ, what are you calling for?
So we're calling for a couple of very simple things. The order should be rescinded. The shutdown of Lusa and RTP should be withdrawn, and we're also deeply worried for the safety of other journalists operating in the country, for their safety and their freedom. As we go to elections, there should be guarantees, and this is something that we've seen in other political contexts, that political actors will commit to protecting journalists and preserving press freedom as they go into elections. There should be guarantees of that. That's a very minimum requirement. And those guarantees should subsequently be adhered to. But beyond that, we would really call on, the government in Guinea-Bissau, including the president, to really change this very aggressive uh, culture against the media, and to recognize that if Guinea-Bissau is going to be moving forward in a democratic way, local, international journalists must be allowed to be part of the information ecosystem. They must be allowed to ensure that the public in Guinea-Bissau has access to independent, to critical, to opposing views, but also that the international community has access to information about what's going on in Guinea-Bissau.
I guess sometimes in situations like this, foreign media can be an easy target. Local journalists, what's the state of affairs for them? I think you gave us a hint earlier.
So I would actually quibble a little bit with the statement about the easy target, because what we see is that yes, governments, when the going goes tough, do sometimes turn on foreign journalists and maybe deny them access, maybe say, get out of the country. This is something that we've seen previously in Ethiopia, in Uganda, and I suppose now in Guinea-Bissau. But foreign journalists sometimes have a privilege that local journalists do not have. They can leave. They have passports, they have visas that allow them to leave. Local journalists are vulnerable in a different way, because this is the country where they live, this is where they operate, this is where their families are. Um, Acts of repression can have a more profound impact sometimes because there isn't anywhere for them to go easily. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's not easy. Leaving means upending their lives, leaving their families behind, and might not be possible. Sometimes people don't even have passports, let alone the necessary visas. So local journalists are vulnerable in this way. As I've said earlier in this interview, what we've seen is that there's really been a difficult relationship between the government and journalists, um, including local journalists who work for these Portuguese outlets. We mustn't forget that. We've seen in the past some of them being denied access, and as I mentioned earlier, we've also seen other acts of aggression against the press that includes local media,
Right.
such as the late 2023 raid on state-owned media, by the way, and last year, several times when journalists were being denied access or assaulted in the course of doing their jobs.
Muthoki, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very, very much indeed for that update and giving us a sense of the sad state of affairs in Guinea-Bissau regarding journalism there. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you. That's Muthoki Mumo, who's Africa Program Coordinator at CPJ. Okay.